No one noticed when the human stopped smiling. At first it had been subtle, a slight tightening at the corners of his mouth, a stillness that didn't belong in a room overflowing with laughter. But then again, no one was really looking at him. Why would they? To the gathered powers of the Galactic Council, the human was nothing more than a novelty, a curiosity dragged from the fringes of known space. A Deathworlder, yes, but from a planet so politically insignificant it barely registered on most star maps. Earth. The name itself had drawn chuckles. High gravity, unstable climate, excessive biodiversity. One delegate had announced earlier, their voice dripping with amusement. A chaotic world producing chaotic creatures. The hall had echoed with polite laughter. Now, beneath the shimmering dome of the council chamber, those same delegates continued their quiet mockery. Towering beings of crystalline structure pulsed with soft light. Amorphous entities rippled in containment fields. Feathered aristocrats whispered behind jeweled masks. And in the center of it all stood the human. Unarmed, unaugmented, unimpressive. Or so they thought. "Tell me," hissed Ambassador Viral, his elongated neck curving as he leaned toward the others, "does it even understand where it is?" "It understands enough to stand still," another replied dryly. More laughter. The human didn't respond. He simply watched. His eyes moved slowly across the chamber, taking in every detail, the exits, the guards, the spacing between delegates, the patterns of movement, the subtle shifts in tone, the things no one else seemed to notice because they believed nothing here could possibly threaten them. After all, this was the council. Neutral ground. Untouchable. Safe. A sudden chime cut through the air. The room dimmed slightly as the central dais illuminated, signaling the beginning of the summit's next phase. Conversations quieted. Attention shifted. For a moment, the human was forgotten entirely. That was when the first scream echoed. It wasn't loud. Not at first. Just a sharp, abrupt sound, quickly silenced. Several delegates turned, annoyed more than alarmed. Disruptions were rare, but not unheard of. Security would handle it. Security always handled it. Except, no one moved. The guards stationed along the perimeter remained perfectly still. Too still. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. "Why have they not responded?" one of the crystalline beings asked, its voice vibrating with confusion. No answer came. The human tilted his head slightly, and for the first time since his arrival, he stepped forward. It was such a small movement, barely noticeable in the grand scale of the chamber, but it carried a weight that didn't belong, a shift in presence, like a predator entering a clearing. Another scream followed. This one didn't stop. Now the room reacted. Delegates rose from their positions, voices overlapping in irritation and growing concern. The illusion of control began to crack, though none of them would admit it yet. "Contain this immediately," Ambassador Viral snapped, his earlier amusement gone. "This is unacceptable." The chamber doors slammed shut. Not gently, not smoothly. They slammed. A deep, resonant boom shook the structure, echoing through the vast space like a warning. Silence followed. Heavy. Oppressive. The kind of silence that comes just before something breaks. "What is the meaning of this?" someone demanded. Still no answer. The lights flickered once, twice, and then darkness. Not complete. Emergency systems flickered to life almost instantly, bathing the chamber in a dim, pulsing glow. But it was enough. Enough to change everything. Shapes moved where they shouldn't. Sounds echoed from directions that made no sense, and in that fragile, failing light, the human's expression became clear. He wasn't confused. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't surprised. He looked focused, like a man who had just realized something important. Slowly, deliberately, he rolled his shoulders, the faint sound of tension releasing from muscle and bone barely audible over the rising panic. Then he spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a certainty that cut through the chaos like a blade. This wasn't an accident. A nearby delegate turned toward him, eyes wide. "What are you implying?" The human didn't look at them. His gaze remained fixed on the shadows shifting at the edge of the chamber. "They didn't invite me as a joke," he said quietly. Another distant scream echoed, closer this time, and then, for the first time since the summit began, the human smiled again. But this time, there was nothing friendly about it. The screaming didn't stop. It spread. What had begun as a single, isolated cry now echoed from multiple directions, bouncing off the towering walls of the council chamber. Panic, once a distant ripple, surged into something far more dangerous. Chaos. Delegates who had ruled entire star systems just moments ago now stumbled over themselves, their composure shattering under pressure they had never truly experienced. Voices rose, demands, accusations, fear, all blending into a disordered roar. "Restore the lights. Where is security? This is a breach of neutrality." The human ignored them all. He was listening. His head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing as he tracked the sounds beneath the panic, the subtle, deliberate movements hidden between the chaos. Footsteps. Not running. Not frantic. Hunting. "There," he muttered. Without warning, he moved. Fast. Far faster than anyone expected. A blur of motion cut through the confusion as he crossed the chamber floor, weaving between towering bodies and shimmering containment fields with precise, efficient steps. Several delegates recoiled as he passed, startled by the sudden violence of his movement alone. "Stop him!" someone shouted instinctively. No one did. The human reached the outer ring of the chamber just as a shape lunged from the darkness. It was massive, 4 limbs low to the ground, its body covered in shifting, chitinous plates that absorbed the weak emergency light. Its jaws snapped forward with terrifying speed, aimed at a smaller delegate frozen in place. The human didn't hesitate. He stepped in. One hand shot out, not to strike, but to grab. Gasps erupted as his fingers locked onto the creature's upper mandible mid-lunge. The impact alone should have shattered bone, torn muscle, sent him sprawling. It didn't. For a single, impossible second, everything froze. Then the human twisted. A sickening crack echoed through the chamber. The creature collapsed, its body convulsing as the human drove it into the floor with brutal force. The sound of chitin fracturing followed, sharp and final. Silence rippled outward. Dozens of eyes locked onto him. The human straightened slowly, his breathing steady, controlled. A thin line of dark fluid streaked across his sleeve, but he didn't seem to notice. "They're not here to scare you," he said, his voice calm. Another shape moved in the shadows. Then another. "They're here to kill you." The realization hit the chamber like a shock wave. More creatures emerged now, silent, coordinated, their movements precise. Not wild beasts. Not mindless attackers. Predators with purpose. Delegates began to retreat, clustering together, their earlier arrogance replaced with raw, unfiltered fear. Some activated personal shields. Others called desperately for systems that no longer responded. "They've shut everything down," one voice trembled. "We're trapped." The human glanced toward the sealed doors, then back to the encroaching shapes. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's the point." A creature leapt. This time, he didn't catch it. He stepped aside. The attack missed him entirely, slamming into the space where he had stood a fraction of a second earlier. Before it could recover, the human drove his elbow down into its back with crushing force. Another crack. Another body dropped. The chamber erupted again, but this time the chaos had a direction. Away from the shadows. Away from the creatures. And, increasingly, toward the human. "Protect us!" someone shouted. The words hung in the air. For a brief moment, the human said nothing. He looked at them, really looked this time, at the beings who had laughed at him, mocked him, invited him here as entertainment. Now they were looking at him like he was their only chance to survive. Another creature crept closer. Then another. The circle tightened. The human exhaled slowly. "Stay behind me," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. He stepped forward again, placing himself between the delegates and the advancing predators. His posture shifted. Lower, balanced, ready. Not defensive. Prepared. The creatures hesitated. Just for a moment. As if recognizing something. The human's gaze hardened. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. The first wave attacked. And this time, he didn't hold back. They came all at once. No hesitation. No warning. The creatures surged from the shadows in perfect synchronization, their movements no longer cautious or probing. This was no test. This was the kill. The human stepped into them. Not back. Never back. The first attacker lunged low, aiming to tear through his legs. He pivoted sharply, bringing his knee up with brutal precision. The impact crushed the creature's skull mid-motion, its body collapsing before it even hit the ground. Another struck from above. He didn't look. Didn't need to. His arm snapped upward, intercepting the strike, fingers digging into hardened chitin as if it were brittle glass. With a sharp twist, he redirected the momentum, slamming the creature into one of its own. Two bodies fell. The chamber filled with the sound of breaking exoskeletons and wet, violent impacts. Delegates screamed again, but now the sound was different. Not confusion. Not outrage. Terror. "They're coordinating," one of the avian delegates cried. "These are not wild organisms." "They never were," the human replied. He ducked as a serrated limb sliced through the air where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier. His response was immediate, direct, efficient. A short step in, a driving strike to the creature's center mass. A crack. A collapse. Another kill. "They're controlled," he continued, his voice steady despite the violence. "Or trained. Either way. Someone sent them." The words barely registered before the next wave hit. This time, they adapted. Two attackers fainted high while a third circled behind, its movements nearly silent even against the chaos. It lunged for his back. And stopped. The human had already moved. He spun, catching the creature mid-air and driving it headfirst into the floor. The impact echoed like a gunshot. Before it could recover, his foot came down, ending it. But the others didn't falter. If anything, they pressed harder. "They're learning," someone whispered. The human's jaw tightened. "Yeah," he said. "So am I." A larger shape emerged from the darkness. Bigger than the others. Heavier. Its body was layered in thicker plating, its limbs longer, more deliberate. It didn't rush forward like the rest. It watched. The human stilled for half a second. Then he shifted his stance. That one's in charge. The creature moved. Not fast, but unstoppable. Each step carried weight, a calculated advance that forced space to open before it. The smaller predators adjusted their positions instantly, forming around it like extensions of its will. A commander. The human exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders once more. Behind him, the delegates huddled closer, their advanced technology flickering uselessly in their grasp. Shields faltered. Comms remained dead. For the first time in their long, dominant histories, they had nothing except him. "Human," Ambassador Viral called out, his voice unsteady, stripped of all arrogance. What are you?" The human didn't answer right away. His eyes remained locked on the larger creature, tracking every movement, every subtle shift in posture. Calculating, measuring, waiting. Then, quietly, "From a world where things like this," he said, gesturing faintly toward the advancing predators, "aren't special. Another step forward." The large creature responded instantly, its body coiling before launching with terrifying force. The human moved to meet it. Their collision shook the chamber. For the first time, the human was driven back a single step, his feet scraping against the polished floor. The creature's strength was immense, far beyond the others. But not enough. Not yet. The human adjusted. His grip tightened. A faint smile touched his lips again. Not amusement. Recognition. "You're better," he muttered. The creature roared, a deep, vibrating sound that seemed to resonate through bone itself. The smaller predators surged again, drawn into the clash, turning the fight into a storm of motion and violence. The human stood at its center, surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned, and completely unfazed. Behind him, the last illusion shattered. These beings, these rulers of the galaxy, finally understood the truth. They hadn't invited a curiosity. They hadn't brought entertainment. They hadn't made a harmless mistake. They had placed themselves in a room with something far more dangerous than the monsters trying to kill them. And as the human drove forward into the swarm once more, the balance of fear began to shift. The chamber became a war zone. There was no order left, no structure, no illusion of control, only violence. The larger creature struck again, its massive limbs slamming downward with enough force to crack the polished floor beneath them. The human twisted aside at the last possible instant, the impact grazing his shoulder and sending a shock through his body. He didn't slow. Pain didn't matter. It never had. Two smaller predators rushed him from the left. He met them head-on, closing the distance instead of retreating. His hands moved in sharp, precise motions, one deflecting a snapping jaw, the other driving forward with crushing force. Bone, or whatever passed for it, gave way. He pivoted, using the collapsing body as a shield just as another attacker lunged. The creature collided with its fallen ally, momentum broken for just a fraction of a second. That was enough. The human stepped through them. Not around. Through. Behind him, the delegates watched in stunned silence, their fear momentarily overridden by disbelief. This was not how combat worked. Not against numbers like these. Not without weapons, armor, or augmentation. Yet the human moved as if none of that mattered. Because to him, it didn't. The large creature advanced again, slower now, more cautious. It had seen what happened to the others. It understood, in its own way, that brute force alone would not be enough. Good. The human preferred it that way. "Come on," he said under his breath, circling slightly, forcing the creature to adjust its position. "Think." The predators responded, not with panic, but with coordination. Two attacked high, one low, another circled wide, cutting off escape. A perfect kill formation. The human stepped into it anyway. The first strike came fast, too fast for most beings to track. He raised his arm, taking the blow along the outside, letting it glance rather than land clean. The second attacker lunged at his exposed side. He dropped, not falling, controlled. The movement pulled him beneath the strike, his leg sweeping outward to take the attacker off balance. As it stumbled, he rose into it, driving his shoulder upward with explosive force. The impact lifted the creature off the ground. He didn't stop. A follow-up strike drove it down, hard enough to crack the floor beneath it. Another one gone. But the cost was building. A slash caught his side. Shallow, but real. Warm blood soaked into his clothing. The human's expression didn't change. If anything, he seemed more focused. Behind him, one of the delegates let out a trembling whisper. "He's enjoying this." It wasn't entirely wrong. Not enjoyment, not pleasure, but familiarity. This, chaos, violence, survival, this was something he understood completely. The large creature seized the moment. It charged. No hesitation. No caution. Just overwhelming force. The human met it head-on. Their collision was louder this time, heavier. The creature's mass drove into him, forcing him back several steps. Its limbs struck in rapid succession, each blow carrying enough power to shatter bone. One connected. A solid hit to his ribs. The sound was unmistakable. Crack. The chamber froze for a heartbeat. The human staggered. Just slightly. The creature pressed forward, sensing weakness, its movements accelerating as it pushed for the kill. Behind them, panic surged again. He's going to fall. He can't stop it. But the human laughed. Low, rough, breathless, but real. "Yeah," he muttered, wiping blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "That's more like it." He straightened. Slowly, deliberately. The pain was there. Sharp, radiating. Fuel. His posture changed again. Not defensive. Not reactive. Something else. Something the creatures hadn't seen yet. The large predator hesitated. Instinct. Recognition. Too late. The human moved first. Faster than before. Closer than before. Deadlier than before. He slipped inside the creature's reach, ignoring the strike that tore across his shoulder as he closed the gap completely. His hand drove upward, locking onto a vulnerable joint beneath the creature's armored plating. Then he pulled. Hard. The sound that followed was wet. Violent. Final. The massive body collapsed. Silence fell in its wake. The remaining predators froze. For the first time since the attack began, they hesitated. The human turned slowly, bloodied, breathing hard, but standing. His eyes swept across the chamber, across the creatures, across the terrified delegates. And in that moment, everyone understood. The bloodshed hadn't started with the attackers. It started with him. No one moved. Not the predators. Not the delegates. Not even the air seemed willing to shift. The chamber, once filled with panic and violence, had fallen into a suffocating stillness. The massive body of the fallen commander lay at the human's feet, its lifeless form a stark reminder of what had just occurred. The remaining creatures lingered at the edges of the dim light, watching, calculating, but no longer advancing. The human stood at the center of it all, chest rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths. Blood, his and theirs, marked his skin and clothing, but his posture remained steady, unbroken, unshaken, waiting. One of the predators shifted, a small movement, barely noticeable. The human's gaze snapped to it instantly. The reaction was enough. The creature retreated, not in panic, not in chaos, but with purpose. One by one, the others followed, silent, orderly, gone. The shadows swallowed them as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only the aftermath, the broken bodies, the damaged chamber, and the stunned silence of those who had survived. Seconds passed, then minutes. No one spoke. No one dared. Finally, the emergency systems flickered again. The lighting stabilized, casting the chamber in a steady, sterile glow that revealed everything in brutal clarity. The destruction, the blood, the human. Ambassador Viral was the first to step forward. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the mockery. What remained was something far rarer among his kind: respect and fear. "You saved us," he said carefully, each word measured. The human didn't respond immediately. He glanced down at his hands, flexing his fingers slightly, as if confirming something only he could feel. Then his gaze lifted, meeting the ambassador's eyes. "No," he said. The single word landed heavily. Confusion rippled through the nearby delegates. "No," Viral repeated. The human shook his head once. "They weren't here for me," he said. "And I didn't do this for you." A murmur spread through the chamber. "Then why?" another delegate asked, their voice trembling. The human's expression hardened slightly. "Because if I didn't," he replied, "they would have spread." The implication settled like a weight over the room. Not just an attack. Not just an assassination. Something worse. A test. A probe. And they had been completely unprepared. Silence returned, heavier than before. Viral straightened slowly, his gaze shifting to the remains of the creatures, then back to the human. "We misjudged your species," he admitted. "That's putting it lightly," the human said. There was no anger in his tone, just fact. "We saw a primitive world," Viral continued. "Chaotic, unrefined, weak." The human let out a quiet breath. "Yeah," he said. "You saw the storms, the predators, the disasters." He took a step forward. "And you thought anything that survives that must be broken, or lucky." Another step. "Closer now." "But you didn't think about what it takes to live there," he said. No one interrupted. No one could. "You didn't think about what it turns you into." The weight of his words pressed down on every being in the chamber. Evolution. Pressure. Survival. Not flaws. Forged advantages. The human looked around one last time, his gaze sweeping across the gathered representatives of the galaxy, their fear, their realization, their silence. Then he turned. "Fix your security," he said as he began walking toward the sealed doors. "Because next time—" He paused, just for a moment. "You might not have something like me in the room." The doors slid open with a heavy hiss, systems finally responding now that the threat had passed. Fresh light spilled into the chamber. The human didn't look back. He simply walked out, leaving behind a room full of beings who would never laugh at the word Deathworlder again. And far beyond that chamber, a message began to spread. Across systems, across empires, across the entire known galaxy. Humans were no longer a joke. They were no longer a curiosity. They were no longer underestimated. They were something far more dangerous. Something the galaxy would remember. Not because they sought war. Not because they demanded power. But because when the darkness came, they were the ones who walked into it. And survived.